When the last thread finally snaps on my 67th birthday, my daughter-in-law gave me an empty box and called me hollow inside. I'm Celia Ravenscroft. I'm 67 years old, a retired mathematics teacher from Lakewood High School. I taught for 40 years, explaining the beauty of numbers and logic to thousands of students. I've been a widow for 10 years, ever since my husband Frank died of a sudden heart attack in our kitchen on a Tuesday morning in June 2015. When Bronwyn handed me that empty gift box at my birthday lunch, wrapped in expensive silver paper with a perfect bow, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't throw it back in her face, though God knows part of me wanted to. I looked at it. I looked at her. I looked at my son Alistair, my only child, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd sacrificed everything for, and I said very calmly, I see. Then I asked them to leave my house. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please, stay with me until the end. What happened next changed everything. But to understand why that empty box mattered so much, you need to understand the 40 years that came before it. Tuesday, April 12th, 2025. The rain drummed against the windows of my house at 847 Maple Street as I made my morning Earl Grey tea. No sugar, just a drop of milk, the way I'd been drinking it for 43 years. Lakewood was always generous with rain in April, especially when the lake seemed to share its water with the sky. I was 3 days away from turning 67. 3 days away from a birthday I wasn't sure anyone would remember. Last year, on my 66th birthday, I'd received a text message from Bronwyn at 9:47 p.m. that read, Happy birthday, Celia. Alistair stuck in meeting. Kids at practice. Crazy weekend ahead. We'll call soon. They never called. The year before that, they came for dinner but stayed exactly 43 minutes. I'd timed it. Bronwyn had kept checking her watch, and when Alistair finally said, We should go, Mom. Early morning tomorrow, I'd felt something inside me crack just a little bit more. But this year, I told myself, might be different. The phone rang at 10:15 a.m. Unknown number. At my age, every call could be important. A doctor's office, the pharmacy, or just another scam about my car's extended warranty. I answered anyway. Mrs. Ravenscroft? A young woman's voice, professional and bright. This is Patricia from Lakewood Glamour Beauty Salon. I'm confirming your appointment for tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. I paused, my tea halfway to my lips. I didn't make an appointment. Oh, a rustling of papers. I have it right here. Cut in color for Celia Ravenscroft, 847 Maple Street. Booked 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, I'd been at the library, volunteering at the weekly literacy program where I helped immigrants practice their English. I certainly hadn't booked a salon appointment. I hadn't been to a salon in 6 months. But something in me, maybe stubbornness, maybe hope, maybe just the need for a little change, made me say, Yes, 10 o'clock tomorrow. I'll be there. After hanging up, I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, my knees protesting slightly. Age isn't just wrinkles and gray hair. It's pain in joints you never thought about when you were young. I opened my closet and found the blue dress Frank had given me for our 39th wedding anniversary, just 3 months before he died. To match the color of your eyes, he'd said, and I'd laughed because my eyes were more gray than blue by then, but he'd always seen me as I was at 25. The dress still fit, mostly. I held it up to myself in front of the mirror. The woman looking back at me had deep lines around her eyes, completely gray hair that I'd stopped coloring 2 years ago, and skin that had begun to soften around the jaw. But my eyes, yes, they were still the same deep blue-gray they'd always been. Do you think they'll come, Frank? I asked aloud, as I often did. The house was so quiet since he'd died that sometimes I needed to hear a voice, even if it was just my own. Frank had been a civil engineer. His hands had created things, built things, fixed things. The shelves he'd crafted for my book collection still lined the living room walls. The garden bench he'd been restoring the week before he died still sat on the back porch, half-sanded, waiting for a finish coat it would never receive. I put the dress back and pulled out my day planner instead. My son, Alistair James Ravenscroft, age 42, would be 43 this August. His wife, Bronwyn Marie Ravenscroft, age 40, worked as a senior manager at Lakewood Mutual Insurance, the same company where she'd met Alistair 12 years ago. They had 2 children, Harper, 16, and Mason, 12. We hadn't seen each other in 3 months and 4 days. Not since Christmas dinner at their house on December 21st, when I'd been seated at the far end of the table next to Bronwyn's mother, Eleanor, who'd spent the entire meal talking about her other grandchildren's accomplishments. Bronwyn's parents, Gary and Eleanor Hutchinson, had 7 grandchildren total. They saw all of them regularly, apparently. I had 2 grandchildren. I saw them almost never. That Christmas dinner had been 43 minutes of forced smiles, one-word answers from the kids, and Bronwyn checking her phone every 5 minutes. When I'd asked Harper about her school play, she was starring as Juliet in the spring production, Bronwyn had cut in with, "She's very busy with rehearsals. We barely see her ourselves." The implied message was clear. Don't ask to attend. When I'd mentioned to Mason that his grandfather Frank had been a championship swimmer in high school, the boy had just shrugged and said, "Cool," without looking up from his phone. The worst part? Alistair had sat there through all of it, quiet, distant, a stranger wearing my son's face. This wasn't always how it was. When Alistair was little, really little before the teenage years changed everything, we'd been close. I helped him with his math homework at this very kitchen table. Frank and I attended every single one of his soccer games, even the ones in the pouring rain. We'd read Harry Potter together, all 7 books, taking turns doing different character voices. Frank used to joke, "Of course you love him more than me. He's a carbon copy of me, just shorter." But it was true. Alistair had Frank's warm brown eyes, his quick smile, his gentle way of explaining things. At least he used to. High school had been difficult. Alistair fell in with a bad crowd. I still remember the principal, Mrs. Henderson, calling us in when Alistair was 16 after he was caught smoking marijuana in the school parking lot. Frank had been furious. I'd been heartbroken. But we'd worked through it together, all 3 of us. College had changed him for the better. Alistair straightened out, earned a finance degree from State University, landed a good job. Frank and I had paid for all 4 years, $87,430 total, money we could have used to finally take that European trip Frank had always dreamed about. But parents sacrifice. That's what we do. Then came Bronwyn. Beautiful, ambitious, driven Bronwyn Clark, as she was then. She'd grown up poor in the trailer parks on the east side of town, worked her way through community college, and then into corporate insurance through sheer determination. I'd admired that about her initially. Self-made, tough. Their wedding in June 2013 had cost $47,000. I knew because Alistair had asked Frank and me to contribute $15,000 toward it. We'd given them $18,000 instead, draining most of our vacation savings. There had been 217 guests, most of whom I'd never met. Bronwyn's extended family filled half the church. At the reception, when the photographer arranged family photos, Bronwyn had introduced her parents as Harper and Mason's future grandparents, and referred to Frank and me as Alistair's parents. Just that. Not the other grandparents, not family, just Alistair's parents. It was a small thing. I told myself it didn't matter, but small things add up over 12 years. After Frank died, June 17, 2015, 7:23 a.m., I'll never forget. Alistair had been there. He'd helped with the funeral arrangements, sorted through Frank's papers, stayed with me for the first 2 weeks. I thought grief might bring us closer. Instead, after those 2 weeks, he'd gradually drifted away. The phone calls became shorter. The visits became rarer. Bronwyn's impatience became more obvious. The grandchildren, following their parents' lead, became polite strangers. Now, standing in my bedroom on this rainy Tuesday morning, I realized I was nervous about calling my own son to invite him to my birthday. But I picked up my phone anyway and dialed. He didn't answer. I was about to hang up after the 6th ring when I heard, "Mom? Is something wrong?" His tone was impatient, as if my call was an inappropriate interruption. I could hear office sounds in the background, keyboards clicking, phones ringing. "Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. I just wanted to remind you that Friday is my birthday. I thought maybe you and Bronwyn and the kids could stop by for lunch. Nothing fancy, just..." "Hold on." Muffled voices. He was talking to someone else, hand over the phone. After a long pause, "Friday. That's... Mom, we've got a lot going on. Bronwyn has a big presentation for a new insurance product line. Harper has play rehearsal. And Mason..." "I understand." I kept my voice steady, even though something was crumbling inside my chest. "It's no big deal. Maybe another time." More muffled voices. This time I could make out Bronwyn's voice, sharp even through the phone speaker. though I couldn't hear the words. Actually, Alistair's voice changed, became more decisive. We could stop by Friday, around 2 p.m., just for a couple of hours. I couldn't find words for a moment. Really? That's wonderful. I'll make something special. What is Mason like these days? Is Harper still vegetarian? Mom, the familiar note of irritation crept into his voice. Don't go to any trouble. We'll just stop by, wish you happy birthday, give you a gift, and we'll have to go. We really do have a lot scheduled that day. Of course, any time is fine. Whatever works for you. Okay, 2 o'clock Friday. We'll see you then. He hung up before I could say I love you. I stood there in my bedroom, phone in hand, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. They were coming. My family was coming for my birthday. For the first time in years, we'd be together not because of an obligation like Christmas or Thanksgiving, but just to celebrate my day. Maybe, I thought, things could still be repaired. Maybe this could be a new beginning. I had no idea how wrong I was. Wednesday, April 13th, 2025, the next morning I was at Lakewood Glamour Beauty Salon at exactly 9:58 a.m. The stylist, a young woman named Crystal with pink streaks in her blonde hair, examined my gray hair with professional interest. When did you last have color? 6 months ago? Maybe 7? And you want to go back to color, or? I thought about it. For 40 years I'd colored my hair to hide the gray, trying to look younger, more vibrant, more something. But who was I trying to impress anymore? Just a cut, I decided. And maybe a soft gloss to make the gray look more intentional. Not younger, just better. Crystal smiled. I can absolutely do that. You have beautiful bone structure, you know. Let's bring that out. An hour and a half later, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. The cut was shorter, more modern, framing my face in a way that actually emphasized my cheekbones instead of hiding them. The gray wasn't hidden. It was highlighted, silver and elegant. You look younger, Crystal said, but in a real way, like you're comfortable with who you are. I tipped her $25 on a $68 bill and walked out feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Visible. That afternoon, my neighbor and best friend Ruth Mitchell knocked on my door with a container of her famous chicken soup. Ruth was 71, 4 years my senior, and unlike me, she was thriving in widowhood. She'd lost her husband Tom 6 years ago and had somehow transformed grief into this fierce, joyful independence. She had 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and a social calendar that put mine to shame. "New hair?" she exclaimed when I opened the door. "It's gorgeous. What's the occasion?" "My birthday Friday, and Alistair and his family are actually coming." Ruth's expression shifted to something between hope and skepticism. "Are they now? For how long?" 2 hours, from 2 to 4. 2 whole hours. How generous of them. Ruth followed me into the kitchen and I made tea while she unpacked the soup. "Celia, honey, I have to ask. Are you sure you want to do this to yourself again?" "Do what?" "Get your hopes up. You do this every time. Christmas, Thanksgiving, your birthday, their birthdays. You prepare, you cook, you clean, you hope. And they show up late, stay for 45 minutes, and leave you feeling worse than before." I poured hot water over tea bags, watching the water darken. "They're my family, Ruth. They're all I have." "You have you, Celia, and that's actually quite a lot." She squeezed my hand. "I just don't want to see you hurt again." We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped Alistair with algebra homework, where Frank and I had shared 39 years of breakfast together, where I now ate alone every morning. "Tell me honestly," Ruth said, "when was the last time they called you just to talk? Not because they needed something, not because it was a holiday, but just because they wanted to hear your voice?" I thought about it, really thought about it. "I can't remember," I admitted. "And when was the last time you felt genuinely happy after spending time with them? Not relieved that it was over, but actually happy?" I couldn't answer that either. Ruth sighed. "I love you, Celia. You're one of the kindest people I know. But kindness without boundaries isn't kindness. It's just letting people walk all over you." After Ruth left, I sat alone in my quiet house and forced myself to really think about the past 10 years. The slow, steady erosion of my relationship with my only child. It hadn't happened all at once. That would have been easier to identify, easier to fight against. Instead, it had been gradual. Death by 1,000 small cuts. The pattern. December 2015, 6 months after Frank died. Alistair missed our traditional Sunday dinner 3 weeks in a row. Work, he said. Important client meetings. March 2016. I invited them to Easter dinner. They came but left after 38 minutes because Mason had a play date. August 2016. Alistair's 41st birthday. I wasn't invited to the family celebration. Just keeping it small this year, Mom, he'd said on the phone. I later saw photos on Facebook of a party with at least 30 people. November 2016. Thanksgiving at their house. I sat in a corner while Bronwyn's parents held court at the main table. No one noticed when I left early. December 2016 to 2020. A blur of missed calls, canceled plans, forgotten birthdays. Every interaction feeling more forced, more distant. June 2021. I asked to attend Harper's middle school graduation. Bronwyn said there were limited tickets, and we have to prioritize my parents since they live so far away. Bronwyn's parents lived in Oakdale, 45 minutes from Lakewood. September 2022. I called to ask about Mason's first day of 6th grade. Alistair said, "It was fine, Mom. Listen, I'm in the middle of something. Can I call you back?" He never called back. April 2023. My 65th birthday. No one came. No one called. At 9:47 p.m., I received Bronwyn's text. December 2024. Christmas dinner. The one where I sat with Eleanor and felt invisible. And now here I was, 3 days before my 67th birthday, preparing to try again. Hoping again. Ruth was right. I was setting myself up for disappointment. But what was the alternative? Cut them off completely? Accept that my only child and my only grandchildren didn't want me in their lives? No, not yet. I'd try one more time. I spent Wednesday afternoon at the grocery store, buying ingredients for Alistair's favorite eggplant lasagna, the recipe I'd perfected over 30 years of making it for him. Chocolate pecan cake, the one he used to request for every birthday until he stopped requesting anything from me at all. Ingredients for a vegetable salad I hoped Harper still ate. Chocolate chip cookies that Mason used to love as a little boy. Thursday, I cleaned. The house was already clean. I lived alone, how dirty could it get? But I cleaned anyway. I vacuumed carpets that didn't need vacuuming. I washed windows that were already spotless. I arranged fresh flowers from my garden in the vase Frank had bought me for our 20th anniversary. Thursday evening, Ruth came back over. "I'm worried about you," she said, watching me fuss over the placement of the silverware on the dining room table. "I'm fine. You're setting yourself up for—" "I know what I'm doing, Ruth." "Do you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, you're preparing a feast for people who barely tolerate your existence." The words hit me like a slap. "That's not fair." "Isn't it? Celia, I've watched you pour everything into that boy since the day he was born. You and Frank sacrificed your dreams, your savings, your retirement travel plans, all for Alistair. You paid for his college when you could barely afford it. You bailed him out when he got in trouble in high school. You've been there for every milestone, every crisis, every need. And what have you gotten back?" I didn't answer. "I'll tell you what you've gotten back. Scraps. Occasional visits that feel like obligations. Grandchildren who don't know you. A daughter-in-law who treats you like an inconvenience. And a son who's let all of this happen without standing up for you once. Ruth, I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because I love you. And because I'm tired of watching you break your heart over people who don't deserve you." After she left, I stood in my perfectly cleaned house, surrounded by preparations for a birthday lunch that might last an hour if I was lucky, and I let myself ask the question I'd been avoiding for years. When did I become so invisible to my own family? Friday, April 15th, 2025. I woke up at 5:47 a.m. on my 67th birthday, before my alarm, my heart already racing with anticipation and anxiety. The sky was just beginning to lighten, soft pink and gold breaking through the clouds. A beautiful day after a week of rain. I took that as a good sign. After showering, I put on the outfit I'd selected the night before. A new sky blue blouse I'd bought specifically for today. On sale at Nordstrom Rack, $34, $99 from $89, paired with navy slacks and the pearl earrings Frank had given me for our 30th anniversary. Light makeup, just enough to brighten my eyes and bring some color to my cheeks. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. The haircut, the outfit, the hope in my eyes. I looked alive in a way I hadn't in years. "Happy birthday, Celia," I whispered to my reflection. By noon, everything was ready. The eggplant lasagna was in the oven, filling the house with the smell of garlic, tomatoes, and herbs. The chocolate pecan cake sat on the dining room table, decorated with simple elegance. The vegetable salad was in the refrigerator. Fresh-baked chocolate chip cookies cooled on a rack. The dining room table was set with my good china, the plates Frank and I had received for our silver wedding anniversary from his sister Margaret. A small vase of spring flowers from my garden, tulips, daffodils, hyacinths, sat in the center. It wasn't fancy, but it was made with love. At 1:45 p.m., I started to get nervous. Would they come? Would they be late? Would they cancel at the last minute? At 1:58 p.m., I heard a car pull into the driveway. My heart leaped. They came. They actually came. At exactly 2 p.m., the doorbell rang. I took one last look in the hallway mirror, smoothed my blouse, and opened the door. "Happy birthday, Mom." Alistair hugged me, but it was that awkward side hug people give when they're not really comfortable with physical affection, barely touching my shoulders as if afraid of getting too close. He smelled like expensive cologne, something woody and sharp that I didn't recognize, and business meetings. He was 42 years old, my son, and standing on my doorstep, he felt like a stranger. "Hello, Celia." Bronwyn didn't hug me. She gave me a nod and the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes, professionally polite, like she'd give to a colleague she didn't particularly like. She wore an immaculate gray suit, pearl earrings, and heels that added 3 inches to her already considerable height. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun that somehow made her look both younger and harder. Behind them stood my grandchildren. Harper, 16, didn't look up from her phone. Her dyed black hair fell across her face, hiding her expression. She wore all black. Black jeans, black hoodie, black nail polish. When she finally glanced at me, her eyes were lined with dark makeup that made her look older and sadder than 16 should ever look. Mason, 12, stood with his hands shoved in the pockets of his oversized hoodie, looking at his shoes. He'd grown since Christmas, at least 3 inches, and acne dotted his forehead. He mumbled something that might have been, "Hi, Grandma." "Come in, come in." I stepped aside, trying to inject warmth into my voice that I didn't quite feel. "I'm so happy to see you all. You've grown so much, Mason. And Harper, your hair looks so stylish." Harper mumbled something without looking up from her phone. "Something smells good," Alistair said, and I seized on it gratefully. "I made your favorite, eggplant lasagna, and chocolate pecan cake. I know I said not to go to any trouble, but you shouldn't have, Celia." Bronwyn's voice was pleasant enough, but there was an edge to it. "We specifically said not to fuss." "It's no fuss. I enjoy cooking." We moved into the living room, and I watched Bronwyn's eyes sweep across the space with barely concealed judgment. The furniture was old, most of it from when Frank and I were first married. The bookshelves were cluttered with 40 years of teaching supplies, novels, and family photos. The carpet was worn in places. The wallpaper was from 1998. "You still haven't renovated," Bronwyn observed. It wasn't a question. "Alistair and I could recommend a good designer. This all looks so outdated," I finished for her. I was going to say lived in, but yes. "I like my house the way it is," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "It has memories." "Exactly why you should change it," Bronwyn murmured, but I pretended not to hear. We settled into an awkward arrangement. Alistair and Bronwyn on the sofa, the kids in the armchairs, me in the chair I'd brought from the kitchen because there wasn't enough seating otherwise. For my own birthday celebration, I was sitting in a kitchen chair. "So," I began, trying to create conversation. "How's work going, Alistair?" "Fine. Busy. And Bronwyn, you had that big presentation today?" "It went well." She checked her phone. "Though I'll need to follow up on some emails later. Harper, how are rehearsals for the play?" Harper finally looked up from her phone, and there was something in her eyes. Embarrassment? Guilt? Before she answered. "Fine. Your father mentioned you're playing Juliet. That's such a wonderful role." "Yeah. I'd love to see the performance. When is it?" Harper shot a panicked look at her mother. "In 2 weeks," Bronwyn cut in smoothly. "But I'm afraid we only have 4 tickets. For Alistair and me and both sets of grandparents. You understand how limited theater seating is." "Both sets of grandparents," meaning her parents, not me. "Of course," I said, feeling my face heat up. "I understand. I turned to Mason, trying again. And you're swimming now, I heard? That's wonderful. Your grandfather Frank was a champion swimmer in high school. Did your dad ever tell you that? Mason shrugged. No. He was. He won 3 state championships. I have his medals upstairs if you'd ever like to see them. Another shrug. Alistair jumped in, pride evident in his voice. Mason got a scholarship to a competitive summer training camp. His coach says he has real potential. That's amazing, I smiled at my grandson. I'd love to come watch you compete sometime. When's your next meet? Not for a while, Mason muttered. Next season, maybe? Alistair added vaguely. Next season, always next season, never now. The conversation died into painful silence. Should we have lunch? I suggested, desperate to fill the void. In the dining room, things improved slightly. Alistair praised the lasagna. This tastes exactly like I remember, Mom. I'm glad. I used the same recipe I've been making for you since you were 8 years old. Harper picked at the vegetable salad. This is actually good, she admitted reluctantly. Mason silently ate 3 servings of lasagna, which I took as a compliment. Only Bronwyn barely touched her food. Watching my figure, she explained, patting her flat stomach. The camera adds 10 pounds at presentations. When I brought out the chocolate pecan cake, Bronwyn immediately said, We're on a diet. Harper and I are being very careful about sugar. I could have a small piece, Mason said, and received a sharp look from his mother. Fine, 1 small piece, but you'll need an extra workout this weekend. I sliced the cake, watching my carefully made dessert being reduced to an obligation and a punishment. They'd been in my house for 53 minutes. Then Alistair glanced at his watch, a Rolex, I noticed, that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 6 months, and said, We should probably get to the gift soon, Mom. Bronwyn does need to get home to respond to those emails. Bronwyn reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a box, medium-sized, wrapped in expensive silver paper with a perfect silver ribbon. It looked professional, like something wrapped at a high-end store. Happy birthday, Celia, she said, handing it to me with that same professional smile. We picked this out together, as a family. I took the box, feeling a small flutter of something, hope, curiosity, in my chest. A gift. They'd actually gotten me a gift. Go ahead, open it, Alistair urged, and there was something in his voice, something I couldn't quite identify. I carefully untied the ribbon, it was too beautiful to tear, and removed the lid. Inside the box was nothing, completely, absolutely empty. I stared at it, not understanding. Was this a joke? Was the real gift somewhere else? Was I supposed to laugh? I looked up at Alistair, confused. And then they laughed. All 4 of them. Alistair first, a sharp bark of laughter that I'd never heard from him before. Then Bronwyn, high and cruel. Harper pulled out her phone and aimed it at me, recording my face, giggling. Even Mason, my 12-year-old grandson, joined in, repeating, Empty box, empty box. Get it? Bronwyn managed through her laughter. It's a metaphor, Celia, for decluttering. Your house is so full of the past, so full of old things, old memories, old everything. Time to empty out. Start fresh. It's from a lifestyle blog Bronwyn reads, Alistair added, still laughing. Minimalism for the modern age. You're just as empty, Bronwyn said, wiping tears from her eyes. An empty box for an empty woman. Perfect match, don't you think? I sat there, holding the empty box, listening to my family laugh at me on my 67th birthday, and something inside me finally, completely broke. Not broke like crying, not broke like screaming, broke like clarity, like waking up from a dream you didn't realize you were having. I see, I said again, and this time my voice was different, harder, colder, final. The laughter slowly died as they noticed the change in my expression. Mom, don't make that face, Alistair said, still chuckling. It's just a joke. You've always been so serious. I think you should leave now, I said. What? Bronwyn stopped laughing completely. I said I think you should leave. Now. I stood up, still holding the empty box, and walked to the front door. I opened it and stood there, waiting. Mom, come on, Alistair protested. Don't be so sensitive. We drove all the way here. And I appreciate that. But this lunch is over. Over? We've barely been here an hour. "58 minutes," I corrected, "and that's 58 minutes more than you've given me in months. Thank you for coming. Goodbye." Bronwyn gathered her handbag, her face tight with anger. "This is ridiculous. We bring you a thoughtful gift? You brought me an empty box and called me empty. I don't care what blog you read. I don't care what you intended. I asked you to leave. Please go." Harper slipped past me, head down, phone clutched in her hand. As she passed, she whispered, barely audible, "Sorry, Grandma." Mason followed, confusion clear on his young face. Alistair stopped in front of me. "Mom, you're overreacting." "Am I? You came to my birthday, gave me garbage, and laughed at me. Tell me, Alistair, what part of that deserves me to smile and say thank you?" "It was a joke." His voice rose. "You used to have a sense of humor. And you used to be my son. Now you're just a stranger who happens to share my last name. Go home to your wife and your important emails. I won't keep you any longer." Bronwyn was already at the car, her face like stone. Alistair looked at me one more time, and I saw something flicker in his eyes, maybe regret, maybe just annoyance, before he turned and walked away. I stood in the doorway and watched them drive off. Only when the sound of their car engine faded completely did I close the door, walk to the center of my living room, and very carefully, very deliberately, sit down on the floor with my back against the wall. The empty box was still in my hands. An empty box for an empty woman. I looked around my home. The books I'd collected over 40 years of teaching. The photos of students who'd sent me thank you cards years after graduation. The furniture Frank and I had chosen together. The garden visible through the window, blooming with flowers I'd planted and tended. The volunteer certificates from the library literacy program. The shelf of cookbooks, each one marked with notes and recipe modifications perfected over decades. Was this the home of an empty woman? Or was it the home of a woman who'd given everything to people who'd given her nothing in return? For the first time since Frank died, maybe for the first time in my entire life, I felt something new burning in my chest. Not sadness, not hurt, anger. Cold, clear, righteous anger. I sat on that floor for exactly 17 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the mantel, Frank's anniversary gift from his engineering firm, tick away the seconds. Then I stood up, walked to my bedroom, and pulled out the locked drawer in my desk where I kept important documents. Inside was a business card I'd been keeping for 10 years. William Thornton, attorney at law. Frank's lawyer. My lawyer. I picked up my phone and dialed. "Thornton Law Office," a receptionist answered. "This is Celia Ravenscroft. I need to speak with William Thornton as soon as possible." "May I ask what this concerns?" I looked at the empty box sitting on my coffee table, at the uneaten cake in my dining room, at the life I'd been living for too long. "My will," I said. "I need to change my will." William Thornton's office was in a brick building downtown, the kind that had been there for 70 years and would probably be there for 70 more. His receptionist, a efficient-looking woman in her 50s named Patricia, led me to his office at exactly 10 a.m. William hadn't changed much in the 10 years since I'd last seen him. Still trim, still precise, with his gray beard neatly trimmed and wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. He'd been Frank's lawyer for 23 years, handling contracts for his engineering projects, and he'd handled Frank's estate after he died. "Mrs. Ravenscroft." He stood to shake my hand, his grip firm and warm. "It's good to see you, though I'm surprised by the urgency of your call. You mentioned changing your will?" "Yes." I sat in the leather chair across from his desk, setting my purse carefully on my lap. "But first I need you to remind me of exactly what Frank left me. All of it." William's eyebrows rose slightly. "May I ask why?" I told him about the birthday, the empty box, the laughter, the words empty woman. His face darkened as I spoke. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "That's unconscionable," he said finally. "Your son and his wife should be ashamed of themselves." "They're not. That's why I'm here." William pulled a file from his cabinet, a thick manila folder with Ravenscroft Frank Michael typed on the tab. He opened it, and I saw documents I'd signed 10 years ago, papers I'd barely looked at because I'd been too deep in grief to care about money. "When Frank died," William began reading from the file, "his estate was valued at $2,847,392. The number hit me like cold water. I'd known Frank had left me comfortable, I hadn't known the exact figure. We'd always lived modestly. Frank believed in saving, not spending. The estate consisted of several components, William continued. First, this house at 847 Maple Street, fully paid off, appraised at the time at $287,000. Second, savings and checking accounts totaling $143,000. Third, a stock portfolio valued at $1,843,000. Frank was exceptionally smart with his investments over the years. I didn't know the stocks were worth that much, I whispered. He never touched them, just let them grow. And fourth, William pulled out another document. The lakeside property at 1547 Lakeview Drive. Frank purchased it in March 2015, 3 months before he died. Do you remember? I did, vaguely. Frank had been excited about it, talking about building a summer cottage for the grandchildren. Then he'd died, and I'd forgotten about it entirely. That property was appraised at $430,000 in 2015. Based on recent development in that area, I'd estimate its current value at approximately $1.4 million. My hands went cold. $1.4 million? The area has become highly desirable. There's a luxury development company that's been buying up lakefront properties. I actually received an inquiry about yours 2 months ago, asking if you'd be interested in selling. I told them to contact you directly, but I assume they didn't? No one contacted me. Interesting. William made a note. Regardless, your total current assets, house, stock, savings, and property, are worth approximately $4. $2 million. The room tilted slightly. $4.2 million. I'd been living on my teacher's pension of $3,847 a month, carefully budgeting, clipping coupons, buying clothes on sale. Not because I was poor, but because I'd always been frugal. Because Frank and I had always been careful with money. Because I'd thought I needed to preserve everything for Alistair and the grandchildren. Did Alistair know about this? I asked. No. You specifically instructed me not to disclose the full extent of the estate to him. You said, William consulted his notes. You said I want him to succeed on his own merit. Let him think it's just the house and a modest savings account. I remembered now, that conversation in this very office, 2 weeks after Frank's funeral. I'd been trying to honor what I thought Frank would have wanted, for Alistair to be independent, not dependent on an inheritance. You said you'd leave everything to him in your will, William continued, that when you passed he'd inherit it all. You were protecting him, you said. Protecting him. From wealth, from laziness, from becoming entitled. And how had he repaid that sacrifice? With an empty box and mockery. I want to change the will, I said, my voice steady. I want to leave nothing to Alistair or his family. Everything goes to charity. William leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. That's certainly your right. But Celia, as your lawyer and Frank's friend, I have to ask, are you sure? This is a decision made in anger. Perhaps in a few days. I'm not making this decision in anger. I'm making it in clarity. I met his eyes. William, this wasn't just about yesterday. It's been 10 years of neglect. 10 years of being treated like an inconvenience. My son chose his wife's ambition and his own comfort over his mother. My grandchildren don't know me. And yesterday, they celebrated humiliating me. What charities did you have in mind? I'd thought about this last night, lying awake in my bed. The Lakewood Education Foundation, the public library, and I want to establish a scholarship, the Frank Ravenscroft Memorial Scholarship for engineering students who've lost a parent. William nodded slowly, making notes. All worthy causes. And the lakeside property? Sell it to whoever made that inquiry. I want the money in my account within 30 days if possible. That's aggressive but doable. The development company is eager. However, he paused. If we sell quickly, you'll likely get a lower price. Maybe $1.2 million instead of $1.4 million. I don't care. I want it done quickly. May I ask why the rush? Because I'm going to tell Alistair what I've done, and I want everything finalized before he can try to stop me. William's expression shifted to something like respect. You're planning a confrontation. I'm planning justice. Then we need to do this correctly. He pulled out a legal pad. First, we'll draft a new will immediately. Second, I'll recommend you undergo an independent psychiatric evaluation, not because I think you're incompetent, but to prevent Alistair from challenging the will on those grounds later. He'd do that? For $4 million? People have done worse for far less. The truth of it stung, but I nodded. Third, William continued, I'll include a clause stating that anyone who contests the will is automatically disqualified from receiving anything, even if they win the legal challenge. And fourth, I'll contact the development company today about the property. If they're as eager as I think, we could have a deal signed by Wednesday. Do it. All of it. William extended his hand. Then let's get started. Saturday afternoon, I went straight from William's office to Ruth's house. She took one look at my face and said, What happened? I told her everything. The lawyer, the money, the plan. Ruth sat back on her floral sofa, eyes wide. $4 million? Celia, you've been living like a church mouse and you're worth $4 million? I didn't know the exact amount. Frank managed everything. And you're really going to cut Alistair out completely? Yes. Good. Ruth's response was immediate and fierce. It's about damn time. That boy needs to learn that actions have consequences. William thinks I should wait. Make sure I'm not acting in anger. William's a lawyer. Lawyers always say wait. But you and I both know this isn't about yesterday's empty box. That was just the last straw. Ruth grabbed my hands. Celia, I watched you give everything to that boy. You and Frank paid for his college. $87,000, you told me. You bailed him out of that marijuana trouble in high school. $5,000 for the lawyer. You've given him birthday money, Christmas money, helped with the kids. And what have you gotten back? Not much, I admitted. Not anything? So yes, change the will, sell the property, move on with your life. Ruth paused. Speaking of which, where are you going to live? What do you mean? Celia, you just freed up over $1 million from that property sale. You could live anywhere. Why stay in Lakewood where every street corner reminds you of what you've lost? The thought hadn't occurred to me. Leave Lakewood? I'd lived here for 43 years. Frank was buried here. My teaching career was here. But what else was here? An empty house, distant memories, a son who didn't want me. My sister Margaret lives in Santa Barbara, Ruth continued, warming to the idea. Remember? I've told you about her. She's been begging me to move out there for years. Beautiful weather, ocean views, completely different pace of life. You'd move? In a heartbeat. My kids are scattered across the country anyway. Tom's been gone 6 years. What's keeping me here except habit? She squeezed my hands. We could start fresh. 2 old widows finding themselves on the California coast. How's that for a third act? Despite everything, I smiled. You're serious. Dead serious. But first, we have to finish what you started here. You can't just change your will and disappear. Alistair needs to know what he lost and why. I'm going to tell him. When? I don't know yet. William said he could have everything ready in 2 weeks. New will signed, property sold, psychiatric evaluation completed. Then you invite them here, one last family dinner, and you tell them exactly what they threw away. The next 2 weeks, the days blurred together in a flurry of activity. Monday, William called with news that the development company, Lakeside Luxury Properties, LLC, offered $1.35 million for the land cash deal, closing in 3 weeks. I accepted immediately. Tuesday, I had my psychiatric evaluation with Dr. Rebecca Walsh, a clinical psychologist William recommended. She asked me dozens of questions, had me complete cognitive tests, and at the end declared me remarkably sharp, emotionally stable, and completely capable of making complex financial decisions. Wednesday, the new will was drafted. I read every page, signed every line. Everything, house, stocks, cash, property proceeds, divided among 3 entities, 40% to Lakewood Education Foundation, 35% to Lakewood Public Library, 25% to establish the Frank Ravenscroft Memorial Scholarship Endowment. Alistair Ravenscroft and his descendants, nothing. Thursday, I called a realtor about houses in Santa Barbara. Ruth and I spent the evening looking at listings online, feeling giddy like teenagers planning an adventure. Friday, Alistair called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Mom, his voice was cautious. About last Friday, yes? Bronwyn and I have been talking. We think maybe we overreacted. The box thing was meant to be funny, but we see now that it might have been inappropriate. Might have been. Not was. Not we're sorry. But might have been inappropriate. I see, I said. So we'd like to come over. Maybe this Sunday? Talk things through, clear the air? For a moment I almost said no, almost told him right then what I'd done, but Ruth's voice echoed in my head. He needs to know what he lost and why. A confrontation over the phone wouldn't have the same impact. He could hang up, dismiss me, forget within a week. No, this needed to be done in person, with witnesses, with nowhere for him to hide. Sunday dinner sounds fine, I said. 6 o'clock? Great. We'll see you then. He sounded relieved, probably thinking I'd already forgiven everything, that we'd go back to how things were. He had no idea. I'd asked Ruth to be there, and she arrived at 5:30, wearing her best dress and carrying a bottle of wine. You ready for this? She asked. As ready as I'll ever be. I'd cooked again. Not Alistair's favorites this time, but a simple roast chicken, vegetables, and salad. Good food, but nothing that screamed effort. This wasn't about impressing them anymore. They arrived exactly at 6. Alistair, Bronwyn, Harper, and Mason all dressed more carefully than usual. Bronwyn even smiled at me, though it didn't reach her eyes. Ruth, Bronwyn said with surprise when she saw my friend. I didn't realize we'd have company. Ruth is family, I said simply. She's staying. Over dinner, the conversation was stilted. Alistair tried to be charming. Bronwyn complimented the food. The kids were quiet. Finally, over dessert, store-bought pie I wasn't baking for them again, Alistair cleared his throat. Mom, we really do want to apologize for the birthday gift. It was a stupid idea from a blog Bronwyn reads, and we didn't think about how it would make you feel. I set down my fork. You didn't think, that's true. We'd like to make it up to you, Bronwyn added. Maybe we could take you out to dinner next week, somewhere nice? That's generous, I said, but unnecessary. We want to, Alistair insisted. We've been thinking about family lately, about how we haven't been as attentive as we should be. We'd like to change that. Ruth snorted into her wine glass. I took a breath. Actually, I'm glad you feel that way, because I need to tell you something. The table went silent. Do you remember when your father died, Alistair? Do you remember what I told you about the inheritance? He frowned. You said there was the house and some savings. Why? That's what I told you. What I didn't tell you was that your father left me nearly $3 million in stocks and investments. Bronwyn's fork clattered onto her plate. And that piece of land by the lake he bought before he died? The one he wanted to build a cottage on for the grandchildren? I kept my voice calm. That land is now worth $1.35 million. I know because I sold it last week. Alistair's face went white. You what? I sold it. To Lakeside Luxury Properties. The deal closed Friday. The money is in my account. Mom, you can't. That was Dad's dream. For Harper and Mason. Your father's dream was for a close, loving family. You destroyed that dream long before I sold the land. Bronwyn leaned forward and I saw a calculation in her eyes. Okay, you sold the land. That's your right. But you still have the money and the house and those stocks. We can help you manage all that. Make sure you're taken care of. I don't need your help, Bronwyn. I've already managed everything. I changed my will. The silence was absolute. Changed it how? Alistair's voice was barely a whisper. I pulled the document from my bag and laid it on the table. Every penny, every asset, everything goes to charity when I die. The Lakewood Education Foundation, the public library, and a scholarship fund in your father's name for engineering students who've lost a parent. I watched the color drain from Alistair's face, watched Bronwyn's expression shift from confusion to understanding to rage. You and your family get nothing. You can't do this. Alistair's voice cracked. That's Dad's legacy. That money was supposed to be for us, for the kids. Your father's legacy was love and family values, I said quietly. You threw that away when you gave me an empty box and called me empty. Bronwyn's face had gone from pale to red. This is insane. You're not thinking clearly. At your age, at my age, I'm sharper than ever. I pulled out another document. This is from Dr. Rebecca Walsh, clinical psychologist, dated April 19th. It certifies that I am of sound mind, excellent cognitive function, and fully capable of making complex financial decisions. William had prepared me well. Every possible challenge, every argument, we'd anticipated them all. We can contest this, Bronwyn said, her lawyer instincts kicking in. Prove you were under emotional duress or that someone influenced you. You can try. I pulled out a third document. But you should read this clause first. Page 7, Section 4. It states that anyone who attempts to contest this will is automatically disqualified from receiving anything, even if the court rules in their favor. Alistair grabbed the will, his hands shaking as he read. No, Mom, please. We made a mistake, one mistake. One mistake? Ruth spoke up for the first time. Should we count them, Alistair? The forgotten birthdays? The canceled visits? The 10 years of treating your mother like an inconvenience? This isn't your business, Bronwyn snapped at Ruth. It became my business when I had to watch my best friend cry herself to sleep on her birthday. When I had to piece her back together every time you shattered her. Harper suddenly pushed back from the table, tears streaming down her face. Stop it, just stop. Grandma's right, we've been awful to her. Harper, Bronwyn's voice was sharp. No, Mom. She's invited us to everything. Every holiday, every birthday. And we always have an excuse. You wouldn't let her come to my play. You said she couldn't watch Mason swim. When was the last time we actually wanted to see her, instead of it being an obligation? Mason stared at his sister, then at me, confusion and dawning realization on his young face. Bronwyn stood abruptly, and I saw something break in her carefully maintained composure. Her hands were trembling, her voice rising to a pitch I'd never heard before. You want to know why? She was almost shouting now. Because I'm terrified of ending up like you. The room went silent. What? I said quietly. 40 years teaching. 40 years giving everything to everyone else. And what do you have? This old house, living alone, waiting for your son to remember you exist. You know what my mother was like? Bronwyn's voice cracked. She gave everything to us. Everything. And when she got old and sick, none of us could afford to take care of her. We put her in a Medicaid nursing home where she died sharing a room with 3 strangers, calling for her children who never came because we were too busy working to pay our own bills. She was crying now, mascara running down her face. I swore I would never be that vulnerable, never be that poor, never be that forgotten. I built a career. I made money. I made sure my children would never have to struggle like I did. And yes, that meant being hard. That meant pushing them to succeed. That meant... She looked at me. That meant keeping them away from the idea that sacrifice equals love, because that's a lie. Sacrifice equals poverty. So you became cruel instead? I asked. I became strong, but her voice wavered. I taught them to value success over sentiment. Money over people? I finished. Bronwyn sank back into her chair, shoulders shaking. Alistair looked at his wife, then at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I let work consume me. I let Bronwyn's fear become my fear. I let everything come before you. Dad would be so ashamed of me. Yes, I said simply. He would be. The truth of it hung in the air. Can we fix this? Alistair's voice was small, like a child's. Is there any way to fix this? I thought about it. Really thought about it. Could we fix this? Should we? I don't know, Alistair. The will stands. That decision is final. But whether we can rebuild some kind of relationship, I paused. That depends on whether you actually want a relationship with me, or just access to my money. I want my mother, he whispered. Then you'll have to prove it. With actions, not words. Over time, not overnight. Bronwyn wiped her eyes, her expensive makeup ruined. What about the house? If something happens to you... I'm moving, I said. To Santa Barbara with Ruth. I've already found a house. A small cottage 2 blocks from the beach. I'm putting this house on the market next month. You're leaving Lakewood? Alistair looked stunned. There's nothing keeping me here anymore. This house is just wood and memories. I can carry the good memories with me. Harper stood up suddenly and came to my side. She knelt by my chair, her black-rimmed eyes streaming tears. I'm sorry, Grandma, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I touched her dyed black hair, so different from the blonde curls she'd had as a little girl. I know, sweetheart. Can I write to you in Santa Barbara? If you want to. Truly want to, not because your parents tell you to. I want to, She hugged me fiercely, and for a moment she was 6 years old again, before Bronwyn's fears and Alistair's neglect had poisoned everything. Mason came over too, awkward and 12. "I didn't know Grandpa Frank was a swimmer," he said quietly. "Nobody ever told me." "I'll send you his medals," I promised, "and the photos from his championships." They left 20 minutes later. No yelling, no dramatic exits, just a family broken apart, pieces scattered, with no clear way to put them back together. After they left, Ruth poured us both large glasses of wine. "You did it," she said. "Yes. How do you feel?" I thought about it. Empty, but not in the way they meant. Empty like cleared out, ready to be filled with something new. Santa Barbara? Santa Barbara. The cottage at 342 Seaside Lane, Santa Barbara, was everything I'd dreamed and nothing like Lakewood. Small, just 2 bedrooms, a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people, and a living room that opened onto a tiny porch. But that porch looked out at mountains in one direction and caught a glimpse of the Pacific Ocean in the other. Ruth lived 2 blocks away, in a similar cottage near her sister Margaret's house. We had coffee together every morning, walked on the beach most afternoons, and had become part of a community of retirees who'd chosen California sunshine over their old lives. I'd joined a volunteer literacy program at the local library, teaching English to immigrants, mostly from Mexico and El Salvador, faces full of hope and determination that reminded me why I'd become a teacher in the first place. I'd started taking watercolor painting classes at the community center. My paintings were terrible, but Dr. James Bennett, the retired literature professor who sat next to me in class, always found something kind to say about them. James was 72, widowed 5 years, with kind eyes and a gentle humor that reminded me a little of Frank. We'd become friends. Just friends, I wasn't looking for romance. But having a man's perspective on books and art and life was surprisingly pleasant. I'd sold the Lakewood house in July for $312,000. Most of my furniture had gone to charity or to young teachers through the Lakewood Education Foundation. I'd kept only the essentials: photos, Frank's tools, my favorite books, the china from our silver anniversary. The money from the property sale and house sale, over $1.6 million, was invested, providing a comfortable cushion I'd never needed before. I still lived modestly, but now by choice, not necessity. Alistair and I spoke once a month, brief, polite calls where he updated me on the kids, and I told him about Santa Barbara. Bronwyn had moved out in September. They were separated, possibly heading for divorce. Alistair said therapy was helping him understand his patterns. I'd sent Mason Frank's swimming medals in June. He'd sent me a handwritten thank you note, 3 full paragraphs about how cool it was to know his grandfather had been an athlete. But Harper hadn't written, not once in 11 months, until today. The envelope was in my mailbox when I returned from my morning walk with Ruth. Handwritten address, young person's script, no return address but a Lakewood postmark. I carried it to my porch, made a cup of Earl Grey tea, and sat in the sunshine to read. Dear Grandma Celia, I don't know if you'll read this. I wouldn't blame you if you threw it away. But Dr. Martinez, she's my therapist, said I should write to people I've hurt. You're first on my list. I've been in therapy since August. Mom and Dad don't know. I'm paying for it with money from my bookstore job. It's the first thing I've done that's truly mine, not what my parents wanted or expected. I need to tell you, I knew the empty box was wrong. The moment Mom suggested it, I knew. I should have said something, should have stood up for you. But I was scared of Mom's anger, and I told myself it was just a joke. It wasn't. It was cruel, and I was cruel, and I'm sorry. I found Grandpa Frank's journals. Dad had them boxed up in our garage after you moved. I've been reading them. He wrote about you constantly, how you sacrificed so much for Dad, how you paid for college even though it meant you and Grandpa couldn't travel, how you were the strongest person he knew. I graduate high school in May. I got into UC San Diego for social work. I want to help families like ours, families that break. I want to understand why we hurt the people we're supposed to love. Mom and Dad are separating. Dad says he finally understands what you meant about valuing money over people. Mason quit swimming. He says it reminds him of that dinner at your house. We're all kind of falling apart. But I'm not writing to make you feel guilty. I'm writing because I miss you. I miss the grandma who used to braid my hair and help me with algebra. I miss feeling like someone loved me without conditions. If you ever want to talk, I'd love that. If not, I understand. I love you, Grandma. Harper Chan. I read the letter 3 times, tears running down my face. Not tears of sadness, tears of something else. Hope, maybe, or relief. Ruth found me on the porch 20 minutes later, still crying. What is it? I handed her the letter. She read it, then looked at me. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. But I did know. I'd known from the first paragraph. 1 week later, Dear Harper, I read your letter 3 times. Then I sat on my porch and watched the ocean for an hour, thinking about second chances. I forgive you. Not because you asked, though I'm grateful you did, but because holding on to hurt only weighs me down. You were 16 following your parents' example. That doesn't excuse it, but I understand it. I'm proud of you for choosing therapy, for choosing social work, for having the courage to write to me. Those are hard choices, and you made them. About your parents, I'm sorry. Divorce is hard on everyone, but sometimes families need to break apart to heal correctly. My decision about the will stands. That's not punishment anymore. It's about honoring what your grandfather and I built. Education, community, helping others. But it's also about something else. Teaching you that love isn't measured in inheritance. Real love is in moments, not money. My door is open to you. If you want to visit Santa Barbara this summer, you're welcome. I can't promise to be the grandmother you remember. I'm different now, more independent, with my own life and friends. But I'd like to know the young woman you're becoming. No expectations, no obligations. Just 2 people trying to reconnect. Call me when you're ready. With love, Grandma Celia Batel. I mailed the letter on Tuesday. Harper called on Thursday, her voice trembling with hope. We talked for an hour. She was coming to visit in June for 5 days. Friday evening, I was sitting on my porch with Ruth and James, drinking wine and watching the sunset paint the sky pink and gold, when my phone rang. Alistair. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Ruth and James went quiet, watching. I'd answered his monthly calls for almost a year now. Brief, polite, maintaining a distant connection. But this call felt different. Maybe because of Harper's letter. Maybe because the sunset was so beautiful. Maybe because I was finally, truly happy. I took a breath and answered. Hello, Alistair. Hi, Mom. His voice was soft, uncertain. Is this a good time? I looked at the ocean, the sky, my friends beside me, the life I'd built from the ashes of the old one. Yes, I said. It's a good time. We talked for 47 minutes. Really talked about his therapy, his regrets, his hopes for rebuilding, about Harper's letter, about Mason's struggles, about Bronwyn's fears and how they'd poisoned a family, about whether, maybe someday, we could find our way back to something resembling love. I didn't promise anything. Neither did he. But we talked, and that was something. After we hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness, holding my now cold wine glass, thinking about Frank. What do you think? I asked him silently, as I often did. Did I do the right thing? The ocean answered with its eternal rhythm. The mountains stood solid and unchanging. Ruth squeezed my hand, and I realized I'd asked the wrong question. It didn't matter if it was right. What mattered was that I'd finally, at 67 years old, chosen myself, chosen dignity, chosen a life built on my own terms. I'd spent 40 years teaching mathematics, showing students that every problem has a solution if you're brave enough to work through the difficult parts. Now I'd learned my own lesson. Sometimes the solution to a broken equation isn't fixing it. Sometimes it's stepping back and starting a new problem entirely. I'm happy, Frank, I whispered to the wind. After everything, I'm actually happy. Ruth raised her wine glass. To new beginnings, James raised his. To women who refuse to be made small, I raised mine. To empty boxes and second chances. We drank as the sun set over the Pacific. 3 old souls who'd learned that life doesn't end when the chapters we expected are finished. Sometimes that's exactly when the best parts begin.